Hey everybody, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to talk about this topic of healing all relationships. Because although it sounds incredibly big and vast and complex, the healing of all relationships, the good news is that it's actually incredibly simple and narrow and focused. Because you can pretty much let go of the idea of healing any relationship out there and focus instead on the only relationship that matters, which is the only relationship you have ever had any form of control over, and that is the relationship with yourself. Because as above, so below, another way of saying that would be as within, so without. So when we think about separation, separation obviously begins with the painful segmenting of, and separation and segregation of the various parts of one's own mind. So the only part that we walk around mostly aware of is the conscious mind, the sort of 15% of the top of the iceberg. But what is actually running our day to day experience, usually in an incredibly inconvenient and somewhat painful manner, is that more unconscious part of the self, the very fear based self that the Course speaks of as being the ego. And then the aspect of the self that we're all trying to scramble to climb up towards would be the what I would call the higher self, which you might also call the holy self. But because we are simultaneously afraid of the knowledge and the information that's contained in the holy self, we hold it away and we give all those fears to the unconscious part of the self and do the big la 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 and hope that those three aspects of the mind never come together. But actually, that is the only healing that matters, is to holistically bring the aspects of the mind together so that they function as one, which then can be extended to relationships outside oneself. So when the Course says the only way to heal is to be healed, the next line is, the miracle extends without your help, but you're needed that it can begin. So it extends without your help because when all aspects of this one's mind are holistically joined, I can know myself as healing itself. That is one of the qualities of my higher mind that would then be known and embodied throughout this self. Love, unconditional love, would be something that I experience myself as. So there is no doing, there is no dashing around trying to give love or to give healing to any interpersonal relationship or inter-ecological relationship or any other kind of relationship that I focus out there and say, healing needs to happen between me and it or between it and the world. If I'm bankrupt in here, if these aspects of the self have not been brought together, I don't have anything within that I can project without that can allow for true healing. Outside is asking for the permission and the recognition of the information that's exuding from me, the wholeness that is exuding from me, is a reminder to all beings, sentient, insentient, everything in between, of its own wholeness and its own integration. But if I don't have that going on myself, there is no way that I can extend that outward. So it's a being, not a doing. So the miracle does extend without my help. but you are needed that it can begin. So how am I needed that it can begin? By agreeing to get to know myself without all of um, the bullshit, without all of the preconceived ideas about which parts of me are good and which parts of me are bad, and oh, that ego, that terrible ego that's always doing its dastardly mastermind things to keep me from heaven. The ego is an aspect of the self, and it is tasked with trying to keep you safe. Itself and you. It recognizes that you are one and the same. And it just wants to keep you safe. And yes, it's not very good at it. And yes, it's usually working in some way that is counterproductive for you and for itself as well. But to demonize it or to continue to hold it away like this is a delaying tactic that just keeps separation in place and keeps personal pain rolling on for as long as you want it to until you get bored with it. Because here's the big news that I have for you. If you think of it as the holy self and this one, the conscious self, and then the ego self, and you have ideas about which one of those is better than the other, at some point in your journey, it will occur to you that it's all the holy self. Not in some intellectual, non-specific, fuzzy, oh yes, in ultimate truth, it's all the holy self. No, bullshit, ultimate truth. None of us has any access to ultimate truth here in the dream. We have tiny little echoes, and the echoes themselves are not ultimate truth. They're just kind of pointing in the general direction of ultimate truth. So that is not what I mean when I say that you will come to a recognition that all aspects of the self are the holy self. I mean, you will hopefully sooner rather than later get so bored with the unsuccessful way you've been doing it for millennia, the judgment of what is good and what is bad and what is painful and what is up and what is down and what's contracted and what's expanded and what's holy and what's the opposite of holy, and just turn around to face that ego self, which I would prefer to call the small self or the shadow self, and bring what we currently think of as the holy self or the highest self with us, of course, and ask for clarity of vision. Show me what it is I'm actually looking at. What am I seeing here when I turn to look at this ego self? And when you're not busy attacking it, when you're actually giving it the attention that it craves, that you have probably been denying it for ever since the beginning of time, you will pretty quickly see that this thing that you've been assuming was just a horrible, hateful beast really was acting out to get your attention, and is maybe a little pissed off because you've been doing your best to ignore it for all of this time. But underneath that, underneath the tantrum, there is a self that yearns to be seen, and not only seen, but to be accepted exactly as it is. Its function, the function that you gave it before time began, or maybe right around the time began, is to be the repository of your fears, and to be the one, ill-equipped as it is, that is tasked with keeping you from having to remember your own divinity, the hugeness and the responsibility of your greatness. So that terrified, pissed off little self knows more about who you are than you do. It knows more about your true identity in God, and it always has. And yet, it doesn't really have a logical mind. It doesn't have half of the tools that you have with which to deal with that burden. And so for it really does consider these things a terrible burden. And you, the grown-up, are nowhere to be found. So yeah, you may have to get through a little period where it has nothing but smack to talk to you when you finally turn around and say, hey there, tell me who you are. Tell me what your day is like. What is it like to be you? And right around that time, you might want to deeply and sincerely apologize for having abandoned it in such a callous way for all these millennia. Like, it doesn't mean that you're guilty because you did the best you could with the information you had. I don't think any of us would truly abandon a small self in need that only wants your attention and your love and your acceptance. But that's not how it appeared to any of us, right? We see the ego as some kind of terrible, monstrous thing with way too much power, and we're fighting against that power. That's the way, classically, that we have always perceived it. But when you do turn around and ask sincerely of your higher self, which also knows exactly what's what, let's take away all my faulty, painful, preconceived ideas about what's good and bad and right and wrong and what I should fight and what I should surrender to, and just show me what I'm actually looking at here. It becomes very clear very quickly how the ego has been maligned and misjudged. And I recognize that I'm flying in the face of some of the things that the Course seems to say about the ego. But if you will read those passages carefully, most of what it's telling you to do is to not underestimate the ego, because it is. It is kind of an evil mastermind. It is at least as strong as you, the conscious you, are, and you can never win on its playing field. It is the sole repository of fear and rage and all of those sort of lower reptilian fight or flight survival emotions. And by fighting the ego, that is a fun game, and you will continue to do that until you are thoroughly bored with continuing to do that, but you will never, ever win by fighting the ego, because fight is what it does so incredibly well. So once you dismantle your armor against what you have traditionally thought of as an enemy, you would be wise to continue to have deep respect for the hugeness of this aspect of yourself, of your mind. And that, I believe, is what the Course is aiming to teach you, is to never underestimate it, because it is absolutely vast, and it will not give in and allow you to merge with your higher self one moment sooner than it wants to. It will only do that when it is ready, when it feels safe enough, when it feels like there is enough of a reason to trust you and to trust in the higher self, to merge and join with you and with your higher self. There will come a time when that small self will voluntarily, and to it, this is a form of suicide, because it only knows itself through its fight. It only knows itself through being fearful and through its abilities and desire to protect, survival. So when you take away those things from it, most of the things it knows itself as will go away, and it already knows that. You cannot bullshit your ego. I have tried. You can't do it. It knows. It knows that most of what it is will disappear. Not all, but most of what runs it and what therefore runs you, excuse me, the conscious you, will no longer be a factor. Because if you are walking around as peace, if you are walking around knowing yourself as safety, as the cherished, 100% approved of spawn of all that is, the ego is not only out of a job, it is out of an identity. And so that aspect of the self will cease to function. So it has to be enough convinced that there is something there, and then it will make what it considers the ultimate sacrifice. But it has to know that it is loved and cared for by you, even while it is being a pain in the ass. It needs to know that. And it deserves to know that. There comes a point where you genuinely wouldn't change a thing about the ego, even if you could, and trust me, you can't. It only changes by its own permission. You cannot do an end run around it as often as you try, and you cannot make it go away by focusing only upwards on the higher self. As it begins to trust that you genuinely, genuinely love it, not the shit that it pulls necessarily, that you can stop attacking that stuff. But as you begin to sense into what is the ego that lives in me, you begin to have a knowing, a recognition that this is a part of me, an unknown part of me, that I yearn so deeply to metaphorically hold in my arms again. I miss this one so badly. And I recognize that because of the fraught relationship that I totally take responsibility for my half of, I've been running away from you, I've been fighting you for as long as I've been aware of you, and you in turn have been telling me horrible things about myself and my world. Aside from all of that, I miss you so much. And I so dearly and so authentically want to join with you and know you as myself once again, and be able to hold you and love you and allow you to know yourself as fully accepted, fully cherished, fully loved by me, never abandoned by me. And when that part of the self knows itself as loved and never abandoned, guess what? You get to walk through life knowing yourself as loved and never abandoned. It's an instant replay on the outside of what begins to be true on the inside. And as that little self, which has always felt so maligned, so misunderstood, so betrayed, and having to take on these big jobs that you, the grown-up, should have been stepping up and taking all along, as it falls into line to be somewhat, at least, on the same side that you are, it begins to shed that protective, scaly coating of monster that it has appeared to be all along. And there starts to be funny little inklings that the lower self, the shadow self, and the higher self, the holy self, are the same self. And when that starts to happen, that is a very exciting adventure in healing. You know, it's an ongoing thing. I'm describing my own recent path here, and it continues to deepen. It goes up and down according to what life throws at one. But that integration is a very exciting process because it's in your own hands. You have control over this. You are the one that can turn around and very seriously begin that relationship with the lower self, because it is worth getting to know. It is far more than the higher self, which is already, it's already like way out there. Look at me, I just pay attention, and everything I have I would love to give to you and show you. The lower self is kind of a mysterious key to the vast universe, because it's the portal that has to open before you can turn around and really get everything that the higher self is dying to share with you. That's what's keeping you from being able to dwell in the knowing of the higher self as you. So, my goodness, become friends with that little thing. And don't lie to it, because it'll spot it in a second. But like, all right, this thing that you pulled today, I am having a really hard time loving it. I said to you last week that there's nothing I would change about you. And oh my God, I really meant it that day, but I don't mean it so much this day. This was a horrible thing that you helped me drag myself through the mud over. Nevertheless, no matter how awkward or inconvenient or painful or agonizing or whatever it is that the little shit has caused to happen, it's an excellent opportunity to be able to say and mean, there is nothing you could say, there is nothing you could ever do that would cause me to love you any less. I take this as an opportunity to affirm 1,000% how eternal my love for you and my commitment to you is. And each day, that commitment is only going to get stronger. So you can throw at me whatever the hell you're going to throw at me. I wish you wouldn't. I'll be honest with you that way. But if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. But you need to know that no matter what you do, your love is safe with me. Because here's something. There is no love out in the 3D world that can promise the same thing. There is no support in the world, because that's not the way we set it up, and that's not what the world is for. So all of those things that we crave to be truly seen. It is not possible to be truly seen by another person, no matter what it sort of kind of might feel like for a minute. That person is truly seeing their lens, and you are truly seeing your lens, and your lens and their lens ain't even in the same universe. Excuse me. So that's the truth. So if you want to be seen, and trust me, you want to be seen, not by a horsefly, then the one who is doing the seeing has to be you. If you want to be loved, no matter what, the one who is doing that loving has to be you. And you have it within your ability to do that by making the decision that all aspects of the self have a get out of hell free card from you. No matter how they might be behaving in this particular minute, I am never going to withdraw my love from you. I am never going to abandon you, no matter what. And that creates such a powerful ripple of healing throughout your own being That's what we're talking about. And that is what the Course is talking about when it says the only way to heal is to be healed. It's those ripples of recognition. I accept everything about myself. I welcome everything about myself home into oneness. That's what the world is waiting for. And it won't smell it on you just because you're talking about it. It has to come from what you are actually actively experiencing in yourself and with yourself. And yes, it's a process. Very few people, I'm sure, have just decided to do this and then, boo, immediately did a complete 1,000% forgiveness on themselves or on the world around them. But the beginning of the process is a great place to start. And it might not feel like much is happening for a couple of months. There might be quite a tantrum, like I said, when finally, finally, where the hell have you been? You might get yelled at a little bit by this child that has been ignored for so long. But, let's face it, you kind of deserve it. We all kind of deserve it. And if you take the attitude that you are being the responsible grown-up here, then you will sit still for it. And you will search within and say, how would I feel? How would the conscious mind, self, feel if someone behaved towards me the way I have behaved towards that aspect of myself? And you'll get it. You'll kind of get it. And you will authentically want to apologize to it. Like I said, not to beat yourself up, not to make yourself guilty, because you're not guilty. But it always is a good idea to admit to the mistakes that have been made so far and the fact that you would genuinely like to rectify that now and genuinely develop an interest in what is this magnificent dark miracle that is currently masquerading as this monstrous separate aspect of the self. And it's something that's fairly urgent because, we can all look around in the world and see what happens to egos that remain unloved within. And look at the havoc that it creates out there. So it is quite an urgent thing, I think, for your own happiness and for the sake of the world, to turn around and love the one you're with, so to speak. It's the only one you've got. I don't care what kind of family relationships or friendships or whatever you've got. It all starts within.